Welcome back to my reviews, and I'm going to be doing my first review of 2021. Before we get into the review, thank you so much if you took time to look into my series 2020 Hindsight. If you want to look at that, I'll post a link for that as well. But yeah, let's get into it. So the album I wanted to talk about today comes from a New York artist. It's her second release, and that is Cassandra Jenkins, An Overview on Phenomenal Nature. On this album, she's made a bit of a splash, and I wanted to talk about it because at the moment this is currently probably my favorite album of the year so far. There are quite a few good contenders out there that I'm still listening to as well, but this is definitely one of the ones worth hearing. This album is kind of an acoustic-led album, predominantly influenced by nature. It is a very ambient album with a lot of key elements to do with healing, and there is a meditative quality to this album. It's the kind of album that feels like it was written as a result of dealing with a lot of emotional processing. Cassandra Jenkins' explanation as to, for example, the song Crosshairs, which was I think the second single taken from this album, there's an element of isolationism, and even though that song was written before lockdown and before the pandemic, it is part of that narrative. Now, the first thing to say about this album is that it is not very long. It's only about 31 minutes long. As a result, I think this album it suffers a little bit from being too short. But having said that, that's probably the only thing I don't like about this album. It's very wonderful, it's very sunny sounding, it's got a sunset kind of vibe to it, which I think is really, really great. And a very creative, at times slightly bold approach by going out of the box, maybe beyond something like, for example, Julie Byrne, which plumbs very similar kind of territory. There's some artistic license here which I like. For example, on the track Hard Drive, which was the first single from this album, there is a spoken word passage. Follows some very interesting patterns of ideas, describing this discussion with an airport security official talking about the President of the United States, who at the time would have been Donald Trump. Furthermore, descriptions of a sort of gender politics, and in a sort of philosophical kind of way, in a very metaphysical way, veers into that sort of maybe more spiritual, new age kind of discussion of human consciousness. I'm usually a little bit hesitant with this kind of thing because I find it a little bit off-putting sometimes, maybe a bit too hippy-dippy for me. But that being said, I think it really works on this album. I think if you take it in line with the music and the artwork and the presentation, this is a brilliant album in terms of its themes. Meditation, essentially on healing, and on, as well, very much nature. And that comes forward in a sequence of songs such as New Bikini, and also the final track, The Ramble, based around field recordings and a connection with nature, which I think is really bold and interesting and fresh. I wouldn't describe it as mold breaking in any way, but it does what it sets out to do extremely well. The Ramble is a 7-minute long ambient piece with a lot of very mellow saxophone. There's a fair amount of saxophone throughout. As to what it reminds of, it's essentially something quite close to Julie Byrne, her album from 2017, Not Even Happiness, which was a contemporary folk album with elements of a similar new age kind of vibe. Was a very beautiful album I really liked. I think this one goes beyond that, and there are elements at times that remind me perhaps of the track Kyoto from Phoebe Bridgers' album of last year. If you really like that album, I would really recommend this one too. And yeah, this album is only hindered by its brevity. I think it's too short. Cassandra Jenkins could just do to have added maybe 2 more tracks, and this could have been a 9 to 10 out of 10 album. It's a brilliant album with a lot of relaxing, interesting quality to it. It has no flaws pretty much in terms of the actual delivery. If you're someone who's not a big fan of the slightly more, maybe slightly self-help tinged qualities on this album, maybe that might be something to bear in mind, but I think it works so well with the production, the instrumentation, the delivery, and the whole presentation. I don't think it really matters. For me as well, someone who is maybe not so interested in that side of it, the whole element of bringing in nature and the whole watery kind of vibe that is here on this album, with particularly on New Bikini, Ambiguous Norway as well, and the field recordings of things like Birdsong. These are all very interesting creative ideas which are instituted to make this album really stand out. It is a lovely listen, and I thoroughly recommend it. 8 out of 10, definitely one of the best of the year so far. Definitely one to check out. Cheers!